So one thing I'm noticing is that I'm taking on other people's energy very strongly. Um, and not just that, I think there's also a mirroring I'm doing with other people or conforming to expectations or something like that. It's just like I shift personalities when I'm with different people somewhat. And that's something I used to do a lot. And it's something that I started to outgrow last year. Um, or even maybe a couple years before that. And it's happening again, and I'm noticing it coming up, and I'm glad I'm noticing it coming up early before it gets further along, because I need to be aware of that. But yeah, that's something that's been kind of disturbing to me. Um, but it's something I do kind of all the time. It happens when I'm not grounded, when I'm not centered, grounded, aligned. And it happens the most, I think, when I'm in my head and I'm disconnected from my heart, when there's a misalignment there. And when I feel off track from my purpose. I can see it's definitely been a coping mechanism throughout my life. It's been a way to survive at times, minimize conflict, avoid aggression. And technically, it's fawning, it's a form of fawning. Um, but the most advanced form of fawning is to shapeshift into what you think the other person wants you to be. For a survival reason, because you feel there's a threat, which isn't necessarily physical, obviously, but it can just be an emotional threat, social threat. Um, I think shame feeds this too. So just getting that out. But yeah, I feel like I'm sort of just barely hanging by a thread, pulling myself together. Um, I felt like I was on a fast track to a lot of big life changes. Um, Felt like a completely different reality I was going to jump into, and a different version of myself. And it the feeling and the belief is that I missed the boat, and the fear is that it's not going to come back um, for a really long time. And the fear is that I have to just trudge through this and just accept the way things are right now, and not hope for the better anytime soon. It's just the feeling of like, accept this, accept who you are right now, and don't think that far ahead. Um, which feels depressing to me because I feel like I came so close, And I feel like I worked really hard for a whole year almost to try to break through my barriers, really just to keep the faith and to keep bouncing back after each perceived mistake, and just to not give up. And when I wanted to give up a lot, so many times, um, and through this, even with all the mistakes I made, still finding ways to expand, still alchemizing all that stuff into further expansion. And to see all that and to just feel like, well, now you have to just forget it now. It just feels empty. It just feels like I had a sense of alignment and purpose, and um, I don't know, other than just like there was a rightness, there was a sense of rightness, and I feel like I don't have access to that sense of rightness right now. Now it's just a floaty, wishy-washy um, limbo or blob. I don't know. It's just before it's like I knew the feeling, I knew the alignment, I could access it, and it gave me a sense of strength. It gave me a sense of focus. This is what I want. This is what lights me up. This is. It was just a rightness. Um, and it feels almost hard to say it right now because it feels like it's not there. But it was that rightness that gave me the strength to persist for months. It was that rightness that made me feel like I could expand and trust. Yeah, and it took a lot of trust. Most people around me would have just said, just give up, just forget about this. Just you're delusional. Most people would have just given up, and I didn't. And like, no, this is what feels right. Um, I know there's a deeper truth to this, and I'm going to follow it. There's a deeper truth to this, and that's the alignment. But I pushed too hard. You got to have the yin with the yang, the masculine with the feminine, the active with the receptive. You have to. I pushed too hard, and you could say it was a partial trust. It wasn't a complete trust because fear kept coming up, and I kept having to pull myself out of fear or sidestep it, which really ultimately amounted to just not facing it. But there was enough trust that I could still keep going, and I could still keep going. I could still bounce back. There was enough trust for that, and it was enough to give me resilience and stamina or strength. And that's it's over now. It's just that that's not there. That alignment is not there. It doesn't feel like. It feels hollow and empty. And I'm trying to think this through. I'm trying to see this clearly. But when I think about it, it's the alignment and the emotional energy around it that I think clicked things into place for me. And it started really 2 years ago. It sharpened last year, I think, in some ways. But it's that alignment that brings things into focus. It seems. And when it's not there, things do feel wishy-washy and empty. The old stuff seems more prevalent. Old behaviors, old thinking patterns, old reality tunnels, old behaviors. All the old stuff just comes back up when that focus isn't there, the alignment isn't there. And the alignment comes from the heart. It comes from the heart. It's energetic. It's not a thought. It's not a... There's probably a belief tied in with it, but it's not just a belief. It's an energetic thing. It's a heartfelt thing that radiates, that gives you oomph. It's just a... It's a power. It's comes from the heart. And you just recognize a resonance there, that this is it. It's familiar and it's expansive. It feels like your soul's blueprint. It feels like what's fundamental to you, or feels like it feels familiar, and it also feels like it's pulling you towards what you need to be. And it's rare to come across that kind of energy. That's like both at the same time. You can come across it in variations and degrees, but to have it in full effect at the same time is, in my experience, not too common. It comes up a few times. It's not the first time it's happened, but and maybe in some ways, as my intent clarified and sharpened over the years, as I've had different life experiences, as Abraham Hicks would say, as the vortex got more information, maybe that refined the intention, the desire, and so it just allowed that to click more into place and manifest in my life. So that could be true. Yeah, that could be true, for sure. But yeah, it's not something that I'm used to experiencing on that level, and so it pulls you. And you can't just skip ahead and bypass all your shit. You still have to face your shit. You're drawn up like a magnet, but you have to face your shit on the way up. Otherwise, you get stuck. And some things you can some things you can bypass, I think, lesser, minor things. Maybe it's not so much bypassing them, but it's just easier to let them go. But some things, the core stuff, the harder stuff, you do have to face, and you can't just skip over it. So you're being drawn up, and you have to face those things. You have to go through them to move to the next level. And what I was trying to do is I was like maneuvering around it, snaking around it, hitting it at different angles sometimes, but I was still trying to move out of it. But I was still being lifted up. So I was still being lifted out of the, you could say, the other murky shit. But the core stuff wasn't quite getting broken through, wasn't quite resolving. Although it said you can't resolve it. It's not, because it's fear you're ultimately facing. You're facing fear, and it's said that you can't attack fear. You can't fix it or resolve it. The only thing you can really do with fear is to surrender to it. And I tried to surrender to it. Yeah, I don't want to circle around this story because I've said this story before. But how does this fit in right now? Like, where do I feel with this right now? I feel like, okay, maybe I was circling around this space where these core fears were, and I wasn't quite facing them. So I was dancing around this over and over again, right at the threshold of a breakthrough. But the more I kept circling around it, the more worn out I got, the more hopeless I got. Because you can only do that so many times before your system just gives out. Even with all the energy in the world that you feel you have, it doesn't last forever. And so energy and belief, and eventually you hit a point where you give out. I'm not so sure if it's really, some people might interpret that as like the universe is putting a pause on it. It's the universe doing it, almost like a punishment. I think that's kind of the subtext. It's almost like, well, the universe only tests you so much, then you don't get the opportunity again. That kind of carries a punishment vibe tone to it. The universe doesn't punish us. We punish ourselves, or we put the pause on. And the universe knows when to put the pause because our system just cannot sustain it. Our system gives out. So we fall. And so you go down to this other murky shit. I guess the way I'm seeing this now is, it's, I guess, useful for me to talk this out and use these metaphors because in my mind, I almost thought it was the reverse. Like the deeper core shit is at the bottom and the minor stuff, the lesser stuff is at the top. I don't know. I'm mixing metaphors here, I guess. No, it's more like the deeper stuff is in a way higher up because it's at the threshold of the next stage, the next level. So you could say it's more hidden from you, maybe. But none of this stuff was new to me. It was just stuff I've been aware of for a long time. But there might be something I'm missing. No, it just feels like the core stuff, the biggest stuff, is really at the threshold. And if that's coming up more and more, that's a good thing. That's a sign that you're getting closer and closer to the threshold. But if you're in this other murky stuff that's like heavy but not as intense, in a way that just means you've fallen back further, I think. And in theory, that stuff is easier to pull yourself out of, in theory. But it can be a lot of it at once. And you have to rebuild your strength and your trust. And you have to do your best to not identify with any of that stuff. But you can only get so far just doing that mentally. You can't, with this whole process, you can't get very far with your mind alone. You have to have your heart connected with your mind. You have to have the heart mind alignment to truly break out of this. Otherwise, it is hopeless. You cannot break out of this completely with just the mind, with just observing. Just mindfulness on its own is not enough, I don't think. It's one half of the equation. But you need firepower. You need a powerful magnetic resonance of something that's pulling you out of this muck. That's where your heart comes in. So you got the magnetism pulling you, and then you have the mind that you can use as a sword to cut your way through the bullshit. The mind is supposed to see clearly. You use the mind to see clearly what's in the way. And the clearer you see it, the more it dissolves. And then the heart, you just trust it. You just trust that it knows what resonates the most for you, and you trust it and you follow it. So that's what you do. But when you get to those core fears, you have to surrender. You can't. What's going to happen as you approach those core fears is that the mind is going to convince you that you're going to die if you go into it. The survival threat is going to kick in more strongly. And it can find all kinds of ways, clever ways, to spin a story of what that really means. If you're smart enough to see, like, you're obviously not going to physically die, which it can honestly feel like that. But if you can see through that layer, it's going to bring up other layers too. Well, something else will die, which might. It is a death to cross that line, and it is a rebirth to come out the other side of that. So that's true. But the fear there is that life is going to be worse on the other side, that you're going to lose something so important to you that life is not going to be worthwhile once you get to the other side of that. That's the argument. And if you give into the fear explanation, you're not going to get through that. And that's where I got stuck. Yeah, so I am trying to use my skills of mindfulness to navigate this, knowing that it's not enough, knowing that it's just like effortful. It's a purely masculine approach to just use the mind, just to do mindfulness, just to observe your thoughts and emotions, to detach. It's purely masculine, and when your heart is disconnected from the process, it feels very effortful. Even when you're trying to not use effort with it, it still feels like there's some effort put into it. And it's not enough. It's just it's one piece of the puzzle, but it's not enough. It's impotent on its own. When the heart is involved and it has this energy to it that is resonant and expansive, there's sort of an aliveness there. The aliveness is the juiciness. It brings a fullness to it. It brings I don't know exactly how to explain it other than with just a purely mental approach. It feels cold. It feels there's some degree of strain involved. It feels empty. Um, yeah, it just feels cold. When the heart is involved, it's juicy. It's melting. It's looser. When the heart's involved, things loosen up. Things soften. And it's not about effort, it's just about allowing. It's about resonating. It's just softening. When the heart is involved, there's emotional release. Things come unstuck. Things flow more. The heart allows flow. Although in a way it's really, you have to come unstuck for the heart to come alive, to come open, for this to happen. So you have to come unstuck first. And then the heart can expand. Then things flow. You come unstuck with honesty, facing your emotions, just being very honest, just opening up. And you have to feel safe enough to do that. You either have to feel safe enough to do it or desperate enough to do it. Like nothing else matters except for doing this. So you either reach that point or you have to feel really safe to do it. Then you can be honest with yourself. You can't be honest with yourself otherwise, because you'll fool yourself. Your ego will get in the way. It will hijack it. It will create walls. It will create partial truths. And you won't be able to get unstuck with that. So you have to either feel really safe, or you have to be in a sort of do or die kind of mentality where it's like there's no other option except to be honest right now. Nothing else is important except facing this emotion. So if you can come to that, then you can come unstuck. And it's not necessarily going to happen overnight. It could, but if you're really stuck, it can be a process. And you got to revisit it as many times as you need to until you're really unstuck. And coming unstuck isn't just about the emotional release. It's also about changing your life. It's reevaluating everything. The web you're stuck in, everything. Who you are. So you come unstuck first. Because you can be honest with yourself first. Things flow again. They start to. And then you can shift. You got to give yourself time for that to really flow. Let it integrate, let it deepen, let it flow. More and more, get used to it, acclimate to it, make room for it. And then once it's really flowing, and you'll know it, because things will just shift around you without you even trying. Things will just shift. New opportunities will come. People will flock more to you. Because people can sense it. People can sense that kind of shift. And you'll start to feel different. And then you can bring your mind on board with intention. Then you can see more clearly what you want, or you can allow it. You can bring your mind on board with intention. And from that place, you initiate a new current, a flow that's already been initiated. Really, it's already been initiated, but it just like gets sharper. The mind makes it sharper. That's when things take off. Then it's your job to, this is already starting to happen with the flow, but now you're getting closer and closer to this threshold of a new place. And that's when you're getting closer and closer to, okay, what are your core fears that are preventing you from moving to this new place? That's when you can start to see that and face it. And so your heart is going to lead you there, but then it's up to the mind at that point to see clearly through the fear. You have to allow your heart to trust the process. The heart trusts the process. The heart is so tuned into its alignment, to its resonance, what it knows is right, that it trusts, it surrenders. And the mind, you use the mind to see clearly, to pull apart beliefs, to dissect them, to look at the fear and just dissect it as this is just not true. What the story the fear is saying has no inherent truth to it. The mind has to be able to do that, to allow the fear, that is definitely true of the minor fears. It could be the case that I don't know if it can fully do that with the deeper fears. But what it does have to do is you have to be cognizant of when the mind is creating stories of the fear, around the fear. Stories of outcomes. It's the outcome of what it thinks is going to happen if you go through the fear. What you're going to lose. What that's going to mean for your life. And you have to be able to use the mind to dissect it. Just flat out to not believe it. To not believe those stories. So you have to have clarity of mind, trust from your heart, trust in the resonance, trust in the process, and then clarity of mind to not buy into any of those stories about the outcome. At this point, you're not thinking about the outcome. You're just trusting the resonance. And maybe that's the thing. Maybe that's the kicker, the key. When you get to this point, you can't think about the outcome. All you can do is trust and just allow it to happen. And face whatever possibility surrendering to that fear brings. That's what you have to do. When you're still swimming a bit before this, you need the mind to dissect those beliefs. You need the mind to. Sometimes you can still think about the outcome, And that can kind of propel you forward and forward. So it's not necessarily bad to think about the outcome from this place. But once you get to that threshold, I don't think you can cross it while still thinking about the outcome. You have to surrender that too. So it really is just complete trust. Which can feel like death. It can feel like dying. Yes. It's the only way to go through to the next level. You're still rising, you're still ascending in a way. Your energy is improving, you're changing. But to really penetrate to the next level, a level of freedom, potentially, or whatever's on the other side, to just keep moving, to keep expanding, you're going to hit that. And that's the only thing to do. You can't believe any story that the fear tells you. You can't think about the outcome, because as soon as you start thinking about the outcome, you're vulnerable to stories that the fear is going to make up, that the mind is going to create, which can be very clever, which can target your deepest vulnerabilities, which can be incredibly convincing. So you really have to just completely give up all expectations of outcomes at that point to be immune to that subterfuge. Otherwise, you're probably going to fall again. You're probably going to just circle around the fear and fall. Self-sabotage. And you can't really stay, I mean, you can, but you can't, I don't think, really stay in this in-between place where you're about to cross the threshold, but you're not facing those fears, and you don't want to go back down to the below place where you were earlier. So it's like you're swimming in this in-between place. It's not a bad place, comparatively speaking, but those fears are going to haunt you. You're not going to be able to completely escape them. The universe is going to create situations that are going to bring them up again, that they're just going to be in your face. So it's like either you descend to a lower level, your prior comfort zone, and you just stay there, or you transcend and you move to the higher level. But you can't just keep circling around that limbo space without facing those core fears. It doesn't mean you're going to fall right away. I don't know how long you can stay there. For some people, maybe it could be years. I don't know, but it's not going to be easy necessarily. It's a lighter existence than the comfort zone that's in the below level. So it's better in some aspects than that, but it's also it's not sustainable. I don't think. You're going to have to face those fears in some way. So if you fall back down again to that lower level, it means you got stuck. It means your heart closed off. So you have to unblock your heart. You have to find the fire again. Clarify your intention, reset it, and follow the resonance. And if there's not immediately an external source of that resonance, it's okay, because if the resonance is there, it's not just coming from the external, it's coming from you. Your soul is being activated. Your heart is being activated. It knows what is right for it. You might have to clear away some doubt first, and that might be part of the block. Clearing away the doubt to get back to that. Then you just gotta follow it again. Got about 15 minutes left on this, so I'll segue into talking about clearing away doubt. Can get to a point where I think my biggest hang-up maybe was being not okay with feeling like I needed something external to validate me. There's a whole lot there to unpack. And I can't do that all in this. I was fighting myself in a way because my heart resonated with something. It knew what resonated for it. And I sensed that there was a larger reason for it. There was a larger purpose, that it wasn't just about that thing. It was about a larger purpose. I sensed that. It was about me becoming a different person, evolving, stepping up more into my power, stepping up more into my higher calling. And there was some kind of purpose unfolding with that I think also had to do with, I think it had to do with all aspects of my life, honestly. Socially, career-wise, spiritually, big time spiritually, psychologically and emotionally, potentially financially, physically, even just in all aspects of my life, it would have impacted and evolved, taken to the next level. So there was a reason, a larger reason. It wasn't just about the thing, it was the whole process and the ripple effects from that. Something knew that. And at the same time, the further along this journey I went, there was something else fighting that, that was thinking, um, you need to go within, you need to not rely on something external. Almost like it wanted to cut off this resonance and see it. It almost saw the resonance as fake, or like I shouldn't have it, and that I should only rely on myself. I should only rely on my direct connection with the universe. I should only I should be able to shift all this stuff by myself from within. And there's kind of a sick feeling I get from that, from talking about it, because it doesn't feel true. And it feels like a distortion of some spiritual propaganda that's put out there that is, I think, very narrow minded. Um, but I was fighting these two sides. Both of these two sides were in conflict with each other. And I was kind of going between one and the other, really more towards the former, but sometimes getting pulled into this second way of seeing it, which I think was triggered mostly by a sense of unworthiness. I think it was covering up a feeling of unworthiness, and it was using this as an excuse, which has happened for me before. My mind will sometimes create these clever spiritual co-optations to rationalize a wound or something, to rationalize self-sabotage. It'll say, well, it's for a spiritual reason. It's for your evolution. Which always feels cold and empty and hollow and like, I guess, fundamentally untrue, although it is pointing to a truth. It's not like there's no truth in it, and that's why it can be so convincing. There is a truth to it, but it's something just off about it. And when I just look at the whole thing, put it out there, I don't know, it just seems like another distraction or just another just bullshit way to sabotage. It just like your soul knows. It knows what it wants and needs. And it doesn't always make sense at first, but there is a larger reason for it. And the further you go down that path, the more it's going to make sense. And I've gotten even additional insights about why this path was so important to me. And I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to go back on that path. And if I am ever able to, it's going to be a different path still. But even just getting additional insights of where that path was leading to, just more of the reason for it. And it's like, that makes sense. Makes a lot of sense now. Like things I was supposed to create, like really purposeful things that felt part of my whole reason for being here. It felt like a big deal. And there's a sick feeling, there's a nauseous and even kind of nihilistic feeling of just the thought that I fucked that up, and that path is now off limits to me, that I pushed it away, that I sabotaged it. If that's true, which I don't know if that's true, but it's probable that it's going to be a different path if I'm able to go down it again. And maybe that's not a bad thing. But there's still grief there. You still have to grieve what you've lost, even if you can regain it at some point, because it's not going to be the same. It's not going to be the same. You lost something. At the very least, you lost time. But you lost something. So there is grief, and shame, sense of defeat, because you put so much into this and you really thought, you were afraid you couldn't get it, but you really thought that you could if you persisted. You had enough trust to persist, more than you've ever persisted ever in your life, ever. To still feel defeated after that is soul crushing. It's a lot. It's hard to face that. And to know it wasn't anyone else who sabotaged it, it was you. It was you. To try to not feel shame about it, to try to learn the lesson so you can actually change, yet also genuinely to forgive yourself. Is its own lesson. It's its own lesson. Because you've been through this in some ways before, and you were so committed that this is not going to happen again. I'm not going to let this happen ever again. And to see it happen all over again. And this time, at least in part, because you gave into this other story, this story that says you're not supposed to rely on anything outside you. Just all go inside. You're supposed to make all these changes inside, and even beyond that, supposed to cut off all attachment. Just all this bullshit that means absolutely not a fucking goddamn thing. It's just spiritual garbage. It's just words. It has no meaning. It's stuff people spit out, put on Facebook and Instagram and fucking self-help books and spiritual books. And even teachers that I really respect more than any other teacher, that they can sometimes say things that can be interpreted that way, even though I think there's more nuance around it. Like to listen to all that stuff that sounds right but isn't true, because it's meaningless words. It has absolutely no meaning. You got to go within. You can't rely on anything outside you. What does that mean? You are doing that when you're following your resonance, when you're unblocking your heart and you feel that again, and you feel the resonance, and something knows what's right for you. And then you just have to deal with the self-doubt, because that's what's blocking you. When your heart's unblocked, then it's just the self-doubt you got to get out of the way. And then when you approach it, the core fear that you surrender to, which all of that is a spiritual process. All of that is pushing you towards evolution. All of that is ultimately about facing yourself. But to have some kind of interface with the world, with some kind of thing out there that seems out there, but isn't. It's nothing out there is really ever out there. It's all part of you. So there is no inner and outer. There's no out there and in here. It's all the same. That's what alchemy is about. That's the core truth alchemy points to. You can externalize your spiritual process, but it has to be something that activates you, that pulls on you, that burns you alive. The The first step in alchemy is calcination, fire. But you have to have that fire first. You have to have a fire that can burn. If you don't have a fire that can burn, there's no start. You're done. There's no going forward. And that's how most people on the spiritual path, what they do. There's no fire. It's this cold mental mindfulness bullshit. That without the fire means absolutely nothing. It's just mental masturbation. And then spouting out spiritual propaganda that sounds true, sounds good, but again means absolutely nothing. When there's no resonance, when there's no heart, when there's no fire. Fire. And maybe in the end, ultimately, you got to burn even your own heart. But you're not going to do that if you don't have the heart opened in the first place. It's not going to happen. Your journey ends before it begins. So yeah. So I was listening to that spiritual garbage, the Instagram posts and pop bullshit. That's not true. Really, because I felt unworthy. And I felt I had to sabotage it because I was unworthy. You externalize your process. Otherwise, it's just stuck in you and it's just circling around you. You're stuck in a loop. You externalize it in some way. Jed McKenna talks about you externalize it with writing it out. The alchemist did it with chemicals. If you have a twin flame, you're doing it with your twin flame.